Let's go to the book of Jonah. If you have your smartphone, we're going to set this up today and start walking through this wonderful book, Jonah. A crusty, resilient prophet who needed an attitude adjustment. You ever known anybody like that? Don't admit it. But anyway, God calls Jonah to go to a place he didn't want to go. And he becomes resistant, and ultimately in his efforts to flee God's calling, he gets thrown off a boat and is swallowed by a big fish. How many know the story of Jonah? If you don't, that's okay. You need to read it sometime. And all that happens only for him to be regurgitated on dry land. And he decides to comply after that. I would too, wouldn't you? And Nineveh is saved. All the while he reflects a bad attitude and remains resistant to God's calling. But as Grant McClung, I thought I would throw this out here because we lost Grant this past week, and it was painful. My seminary professor who was a missiologist, I remember him talking about Jonah, and he profoundly said years ago while I was at seminary, the book of Jonah is far, far, far more than a big fish story. And some of you haven't looked at it in a while because you have perceptions of it. We often miss the responsibility of God's calling on our lives in the book of Jonah when we reduce it to a children's story or a big fish story. And I'll never forget him coaching and leading conversations in that seminary class, and it began to unfold for me, and it really had an impact on my life as it related to missions and my view of the world, my worldview. Some of you resist that and may think it's a worthless conversation, but you're going to find it's not a worthless conversation when it comes to God. God loves more than you. He loves the world. He loves the world. He loves those have-nots, those who have not. He loves them every bit as much as you. And we are called upon to reflect the love of God. This message and messages to come will not be designed to make us feel guilty. They'll be designed to shock us a little bit and to help us get the cobwebs out of our head and perhaps expand our view just a little bit. It's very necessary. And Jonah is not just about a fish, it's about a loving God who loves the most unlovable. He loves the nations and gives people like you and I, can you imagine? Holy assignments. He gives us holy assignments to serve people in places where He wants to manifest His love. So quickly, Jonah 1:1-3, it says, "Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, 'Arise.'" Can you imagine having the Lord say this to you? "Get up and go to Nineveh, that great city, that highly populated city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me." Verse 3, "But Jonah arose to flee to Tarshish." You'll discover he went the opposite way. "From the presence of the Lord, he went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare." And sometimes you got to pay to get out of God's will. You pay. Just a thought. "And he went down into it, and to go with them to Tarshish, fleeing the presence of who? The Lord." The book of Jonah is so significant for understanding the biblical basis of mission because it speaks of God's command for His people to go, to know that God calls all of us to a holy assignment. I'm going to quickly drop this in here. Some of you are automatically thinking I could be called to go across the sea. Let me tell you, before you can know if you're ever called to go across the sea, you need to get used to going across the street. I hear people with these grandeur ideas with winning the world, and they can't even get across the street. They can't get next door. How in the world are you going to go across the sea and do this great big ministry when you can't even get across the street? A perspective. And one might say that Jonah serves as this preparatory step to this missionary mandate of the New Testament. It's about a missionary being called to go out. It is also important for catching a glimpse of the potential deep resistance of God's commands. And they can get away from any of us, and we can all become that person that he's calling to do a holy assignment. So why should he choose anyone who would refuse him? It's beyond me, but he does. And he does it not for our sake. This is very important. He doesn't call you for your sake. He calls you, listen to this, he calls you to those whom he loves. He loves you, but he doesn't just call you for you. He calls you for others. Am I making any sense? To look at people and people groups the way God, where the God, the Creator, looks at them is what Jonah is all about. He tells us he's no respecter of person. This book is a prophetic picture that he loves, and he went to the lowest places for the whosoever. It's a lesson on the need we all have to be world Christians with world views. It reveals the need for a radical conversion of our natural tendencies to stereotype and pigeonhole people. And it reveals the need for a complete restructuring of our hearts and perspectives to make them serviceable, yes, for God's mission. Not your mission, but God's mission. The title of the book is a personal name of the unwilling prophet Jonah. The author uses his personal name to portray to his readers a missionary who has no heart for the Gentiles, and who, like the New Testament Pharisees, cannot tolerate a God who shows mercy to people with whom he doesn't approve. They're not among us, are they? The message of the book is directed toward Israel, who's become so preoccupied with herself that she can no longer direct her eyes toward the world made up of nations. And summed up in one statement, it would be that we need to take God's love for people very seriously. Stuart Briscoe reiterated Grant McClung's position on Jonah when he said, when reading Jonah, I fully discovered we must see more than a big fish. We must see a God that loves the world. Israel, the recipient of all God's revelation, refuses to set foot in an alien territory to tell other people God's message of judgment, love, and liberation. But the message of the book is also addressed to the New Testament congregations, which tries various ways of evading and hearing God's command to speak this message to the world. And it's for us today as well. And it's addressed to you and I, who often do the same thing. So before you get too critical of Jonah, this book will cause us to reflect and do some introspection about our own perspectives. We discover through Jonah that the radius of God's liberating activity is wide enough to encompass the whole entire world. Do you believe that? There's 8 scenes found in this book. I'm only going to have time to touch on one. There's Jonah's call. There's Jonah's calculated escape. There's Jonah's crisis. There's Jonah's conversion. There's Jonah's consent. There's Jonah's conversions. There's Jonah's complaining. And there's Jonah corrected. In this first chapter, we observe the necessary steps God takes to get Jonah's attention. First, he calls. God calls. Now, the word of the Lord came to Jonah. Has anybody had the word of the Lord come to you? The word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. This first scene opens with Jonah receiving the command to go to Nineveh. And it's interesting to note that the Old Testament usually appeals to the other nations to come to Zion. Come, in other words, to Israel. Come to the mountain of God. Come to us. That's what you see mostly in the Old Testament. But Jonah, much like the disciples of the New Testament, are told to go. He's not to go sit there and wait for Nineveh to come. He's to go to Nineveh, to go. That is his holy assignment, a call from God to go. So where must Jonah go? To a place, this Nineveh of all places, Nineveh, the very center of totalitarianism, brutality, and a warlike activity. There's not one of us that would enjoy walking into Nineveh. Might be a little bit like how we perceive parts of Afghanistan. Good luck. So before you criticize Jonah, step back and think, when you understand the context of this place called Nineveh, how happy it would make you if you were told to go to a place like that. Nineveh, noted for control and dominance, vicious torture, imperialistic punishment it reserved for those who chose to oppose its policies. God wants his servant to warn Nineveh of coming judgment. You keep that up. You keep going the direction you're going, and there's a God that's bigger than you that's going to set on you. Aren't you glad that he takes care of stuff like that? This isn't easy for old Jonah. Jonah, the Jew, the prophet, the man of God, going to a non-covenant people. Let's be honest, the lowlifes, the scum of the earth. Not me, Lord. I have a better plan for my life than doing that. He's not only called to a place, he's called to a real people in that place, a people. I want you to notice something here with me for a moment. In the first 3 verses, I noticed an overwhelming, abundant amount of God's kindness. God is concerned about lost, sinful, wicked, evil, despicable people. He loves them and desires to show kindness to them. But listen, we are God's hope for our neighborhoods. We are God's hope for our neighborhoods, for our workplaces, for our communities. Do you see yourself as God's hope for the world in which you live in? Do you carry a message? Do you? We do. We carry a message. It's not just inside the holy huddle places where we all gather. We are a living testament of God's grace and his love and his power to transform. Now, can we give him praise for that? We ought to give him big praise for that. God's kindness is exhibited to Nineveh through the call on Jonah's life. This call is not just for Jonah's pleasure or comfort. This call isn't for just Jonah's pleasure or comfort. It's not a vacation. Anybody could say yes to go to Hawaii for a little while and serve Jesus there. Woo-hoo, I have a calling. This call is not just for Jonah. It's a call to Jonah for the people of Nineveh. Are you getting that? This call isn't about Jonah. How often do we make the call about us? How comfortable will I be? How difficult is this going to be for me? What am I going to do? How am I going to pay for it? How am I going to... You talk yourself right out of it. But this call isn't for you. It's for the people to where you're going. Am I okay? Jonah's problems, they can be similar to ours: prejudice, selfish, intolerant, seeking our own comfort and benefits rather than others. And yes, sometimes precisely our problems as well. And it hinders the flow. We can hinder the flow of God's love and kindness that he intends for others by resisting and making excuses to not show it. Our problems, let's own them. And sometimes we blame it on technique. I don't know how to talk. I'm not a preacher. I don't have a seminary degree. I don't know how to get there. You know what Jonah's technique was? You know what God told him? Go and cry out. Go and cry out. Moses tried the same thing. I can't speak. I have a speech impediment. You go and you tell. You speak. You know what you do have? We just had a beautiful baptism. You know what you have now? You have a testimony. You don't have to have a theology degree, and nothing wrong with a theology degree, but you don't have to have that on your wall to be able to speak on behalf of Jesus. Just tell them what the Lord has done. You know, I mean, if you're nothing else, be like the blind man. I don't understand it. I don't get it all. I don't know how to explain it all. All I know is I once was blind, but now I see. Jesus saved me and transformed me and turned me around. Let's give the Lord praise that he's done that for you and I. Yes. Technique. That's some of our problems sometimes. And Jonah was told to cry out and have a convincing conversation. Cry out. Be passionate. Be sold out. Be convinced. Cry it out. Serving without conversation, by the way, doesn't work. We have a lot of people who are into the servolution movement, and I am too. We've just talked about service. The church needs to stop sitting on its backside and needs to learn to get out and serve its community instead of, again, gathering in holy huddles without serving. I'm with you on all of that. But I'll tell you what I'm not with. I'm not with just serving without having conversations. Serving should open the door for conversations. Serving is easy. You can go wash somebody's feet. You can go put a box in their hand and say, oh, we're so glad. And they can cry and say, thank you. You've met my need, and you can feel real good about yourself. But you need to use that as a gate eventually to get to a conversation. Paul said this, faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of the Lord. In the same chapter, chapter 10, he talks about how will they hear without a messenger, without somebody to tell them what Jesus has done. You don't serve people into Jesus relationships. Service opens the gate. Just like education in China can open the gate. Or I could talk about a million things. In Cuba, we've done this for years. Baseball, as we've worked with Johnny Johnson, we've used baseball to open the gate to where we could get the message of Jesus. I've been on many of those trips myself, and equipping churches to do that through baseball. So certain things open the gate, but that's not the end result. Just having a great big baseball conference with a professional baseball player we take down. They all come by the thousands to hear the baseball. But you know what we tell them? There's somebody better than this baseball player. His name is Jesus. His name is Jesus, and he can transform you and save your soul. That's what he can do. Conversations. So while we celebrate this servolution, make sure that we don't forget that conversations are important. Listen, all Christians are called to share the gospel. Let me get to this second one. I've got to wrap this up, but Jonah's calculated escape. He's a mess, just like us. Jonah rose to flee from Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa, found this ship going to Tarshish. I'm in the exact opposite direction, so he pays the fare, went down to it. There's this attempted escape. So Jonah resists. He refuses, just like we do many times. He chooses disobedience, and he goes down and he sees his local travel agent. And he promptly boards a ship, heading in exactly the opposite direction of Nineveh. It goes to Tarshish, situated at the western end of the Mediterranean. As far as Nineveh, it's as far as you can get away from Nineveh, as he knew to go. In his day, he probably thought you'd fall off the end of the earth. But he attempts to flee from the presence and the call of God. An old preacher said to a young boy, son, I'll give you an apple if you can just tell me where God is. To which the boy replied, preacher, I'll give you a barrel full if you can tell me where he isn't. You've just got to know that God is everywhere. And you can't run from God. Listen, Jonah could not escape God's holy assignment on his life. Some of you have holy assignments in your neighborhood, and you keep ignoring it. You keep pressing it back. You keep sidestepping it. You become numb. But God will show up. He's not going to let you off the hook. There's a reason you're in that neighborhood. You have a holy assignment. There's a reason you're in the workplace you're in. You're thinking about Nineveh and going across the sea as I'm talking. Once again, some of us can't even get across the street. Our Nineveh is across the street. And we can't bring ourselves to go over there and talk to that guy that's covered with tattoos from his ankle all the way and got hair down to his shoulders and popping a few pills, you think, and has wild music. That's not our kind of cup of tea. That could be your Nineveh. Who or what is your Nineveh? You know what I think? I think we all have a little Nineveh in us. We read a story like this and we never consider, that's not me, that Jonah, that hardhead. What? We all have a little Nineveh in us. Have you thought about this? Perhaps you are somewhere you don't want to be, but perhaps you're not there for yourself or for your own personal comfort. I hear it all the time. As you analyze your assignment, I hear it. I hate my job. I hate my job. Now, I don't say anything, but I think it. Perhaps God has you there for a reason. Maybe if you do what you're supposed to do and get a grip on what your holy assignment might be there, maybe God will release you. But you're not doing what you're supposed to do there. Ooh. I hate my job. We hear it. I hate this community. I've heard it. Cleveland, bunch of religious people. Perceptions about Cleveland. First of all, they don't have half of what they're talking about. I see sinners all over. They're coming in from all over across the sea. We got a great mission field right here in Cleveland, Tennessee. People have these perceptions of Cleveland, have no idea. Preachers especially. Church of God preachers are the worst. They think they understand Cleveland and the impact the Church of God as a denomination has on this community. It doesn't have any more impact than anybody else. I'm just telling you, talking to you straight. You just show up at a political rally or show up downtown in a meeting, and you'll find out how much real impact we have. It's time. One time we did. Boy, I tell you, I feel real uneasy right now. I don't know how I get into these weeds, but what I'm trying to tell you, there are Ninevehs all over our community. They're coming from the east, the west, the north, and the south. It's not just about some holy huddle little city where we're going to pull away from the... This has changed, folks. This place has changed. Open your eyes. We got to get back to giving Jesus again through the love of Christ and telling people that he is your solution and your healer and your reconciler and your miracle worker. And it's not about a denomination, and it's not about church. It's not about all of that. It's about Jesus. It's about Jesus. It's about Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And while we appreciate and approve what we're a part of, yes, I'm not cutting on that. Please don't take it that way. I'm just saying that's not the priority. The priority is Jesus. Analyzing your assignment, this is precisely Jonah's problem. Jonah was called to Nineveh for Jonah in his own mind. But Jonah wasn't called to Nineveh for Jonah. Jonah was called to Nineveh for Nineveh. And maybe someone in your circle or place may need comfort. Someone on the job may need right words on a one day that comes up, a solution, or you potentially have a holy assignment and you're missing God's purposes because of your passion for personal comfort. So who or where is your Nineveh? Who or where? I want you to think about that. Sometimes we have holy assignments with blinders. Blinders. The enemy blinds us with, watch this, hold on, with fears and insecurities. You're going to do something big for Jesus and you're afraid if somebody makes fun of you. Sometimes with offenses against people groups. And somebody talked to me recently about a particular people group who brought great harm to them. They told me they struggle with that people group because of what somebody did to their daughter. And somehow in their mind, they've attached it to a particular people group. That's the work of the enemy. Sometimes we're blinded by political persuasions. We talk about the liberals. We won't even have good conversation with the liberals without flying off the handle. No room for conversation anymore. I've Googled it. I've read it. I know. And the other side does the same thing. Those crazy conservatives. Off the rail. I've Googled it. I've read it. I've sat in a class in college. So I know. You know what that professor has Googled. And you know what that professor has said under. It's persuasion. And we're all guilty of it, both sides. And we allow these things to hinder us. And it blinds us from the ability to move the gospel of Jesus Christ, to have the ability to transform somebody because we're blinded by all of these persuasions. I've seen it here in this community between a good country boy out here and a man who wears a blue suit downtown. And I've even seen the man out in the country makes as much money or more money than the man, if that's what you're gauging success by, than the man downtown with a blue suit on. And it goes both ways. It's in our school systems. It's how we line up politically. It ought not to be. I said it ought not to be. We've got to break down these blinders and these divisions and these barriers. So, where's your Nineveh? Who have you written off? Who have you casually said, somebody else has got to take care of that? I'm not the one. I can't take it. It's not about you. It's about the love of Christ that loves that person or that group that he's calling you to. Is Pastor making any sense this morning? Check your heart. Get the cobwebs out of your head. Get closer to the window and see a bigger picture. And see what God really has for you and why you're strategically placed in Cleveland, Tennessee, in the neighborhood which you live, working where you're working, going to school where you'll go to school. You just might be set up for a holy assignment and you're blinded. And you go to church on Sunday and exercise the gifts and want to talk about how we need a move of God. The move of God isn't going to be inside this house. The move of God's got to get out there. Because nothing really happens in here except goosebumps, and we leave energized, and we should, and we leave encouraged, and we should. But unless we can get it out there, it's not really done a whole lot of good. I love you all. Let's stand together. Pray for your pastor as we work through this. Jonah, doesn't he aggravate you? Come on. Read the book this week, and if you haven't read it in a long time, you'll get so mad at Jonah by the end of this book. And you'll think about 10 of them that are in real life around you. But then when you start doing that and getting judgmental, you better look at yourself and understand there could be a Nineveh in my life, and I want to do better. Amen? Let's give the Lord praise for his word and what he does. Yeah. He's a big God.